current contract with some variation. So closing and occupancy. So it already discussed whether it's going to be a primary home, a secondary home, or or other, investment property or what have you. Okay. So the occupancy is as stated previously. It does note here now, though, that occupancy may impact financing, right? And what does that mean? Well, if you're getting an FHA or a VA loan, which are owner occupied only, then you're going to have a problem with any sort of possession over 30 days. They won't allow it, basically. Or if there's a tenant occupied property, they have to have been served or plan to vacate within 30 days. Okay. Now, a couple of things here that have been changed. Condition of the property on closing. Well, unless otherwise agreed, the property is sold as is, right? This is in the current contract in its present physical condition as of the date of acceptance. Hasn't changed. I always bring that up to my clients. It does go on to state that property shall be maintained in a substantially the same condition as the date of acceptance. So basically maintained through delivery of possession. Now, all debris and personal property not included in the sale shall be removed by close of escrow or at the time possession is delivered to the buyer, if it's not the same day. Sometimes possession happens after the close. Now, this is new here. If items are not removed when possession is delivered to the buyer, all items shall be deemed abandoned. Okay, so they've changed the verbiage here, and it says the material possessions that are personal property not attached or included in the price are going to be deemed to have been abandoned by the seller of the property. Buyer shall, after first delivering a seller a notice to get the items within 3 days, may pay to have such items removed or disposed of, and may bring legal action as per the agreement to receive reasonable costs from the seller. Okay. Right now, I think there is some other law in place that says you have to give a certain amount of time. And if they don't come get their stuff, you have to store it for a certain amount of time. If it's, valuable to a certain dollar amount or what have you. Well, now it's pretty explicit. Anything that's left there is abandoned. Seller's got 3 days to come and get it. And if the buyer has to pay anything to remove it, they may have some sort of legal recourse, probably small claims, unless it's substantial. And there is a sample letter in the car letters library that is buyer demand for seller compensation after close of escrow, I think it's called. And it's basically a letter that the buyer can give the seller that says, hey, you owe me money for me having to pay to get your stuff removed, right? We just closed a deal, and there's a condo. And in the condo's parking garage, there's a giant safe. I shouldn't say giant. It was like, counting. It wasn't even like a full size, like, whatever firearm safe. It's like a smaller one that was there previous to the seller. And now the buyer has to deal with it and get it out of there. Well, when you have a multi-100-pound safe, you can't just pick that up and take it to the garbage bin, right? You need some help with that. And that might cost a little bit of money to hire somebody to do that for you. Okay. So anyways, this is addressing all that now, which is great. Okay. Moving on here, buyer is strongly advised to conduct investigations of the entire property. That's in the current contract. And it does state here that we may not be aware of all the defects affecting the property or other things the buyer may consider important. Okay. So with that said, you should investigate. It also says here property improvements may not be built according to code, in compliance with current law, like unpermitted, or may not have all required permits issued or finalized, right? So we're letting the buyers know that, hey, check this stuff out. If you're curious about permits, well, get you on down to the county and take a look about permits, okay? And remember, ladies and gentlemen, you as agents should never be pulling permits on behalf of your clients, okay? You don't know what you're getting. You don't know what you're looking at. You don't know what you're delivering. They need to go straight to the source, building department, or hire a contractor or somebody else that specializes in city or municipalities, building codes, et cetera, right? That's not your job, okay? Let's see here, seller remaining in possession after the close. A lot of important stuff here. If seller is gonna stay in possession, then all parties are advised to consult with their insurance and legal advisors for information about liability and damage or injury to persons and personal and real property. Remember, when the seller stays in possession, or you effectively have a tenancy at some level, okay? So you should insure yourself for being a landlord for the short amount of time, however long it may be. Buyer is also advised to consult with the buyer's lender about the impact of seller's occupancy. Remember, if it's an FHA loan and it exceeds a certain number of days and the lender's aware of it, then they may not get the loan, right? They may force something else to transpire, which would be the seller in possession for a less amount of time, typically less than 30 days, okay? Everybody should consult with an attorney where the property is located to determine the ongoing rights and responsibilities of the buyer and seller with regard to each other, including possible tenant rights, okay? Most of us, except one office is coming on board with this now, but we have our risk management service, the RERM, Real Estate Risk Management, where there are attorneys available. You can have your clients call and talk to an attorney. You can be on the phone for that call as well and get advice about what they should do in regards to possible tenancy. Okay, so keep in mind, you guys all are going to have access to that, or at least the CAR legal is always there as well. But the risk management service is going to be a little bit more, I don't know, easier to use and representing us. So that's something important to keep in mind. Okay. At close of escrow, warranties will be assigned if appropriate. We as agents, it does state in here, we can't determine assignability of any warranties, but essentially anything that has a warranty that can be transferred is assigned from the seller to the buyer. And then I get this question a lot. If there's a rent back, seller stays in possession after close, does the seller have to give the buyer the keys to the property? Okay. And previously the answer was addressed on the SIP and the residential lease after sale form, but now it says right on here, seller shall, on close of escrow, even if seller remains in possession, provide keys, passwords, connected devices, included in the purchase price, like also garage door openers, smart home devices, alarm systems, right? So remember, the buyer owns that property now. They need to get a copy of all that stuff. I have had it happen numerous times where a seller says, I'm not giving him keys to my house. No, wait a minute. It's not your house anymore, all right? You're renting it back from us. Give me the keys. So here is where it is in writing for you to go back and rely on, okay? Let's see here, other things of note. Contingencies and removal of contingencies. So here's where we go a little bit in depth about like some cancellation rights and things of that nature. So 8A talks about the agreement, unless specified, is contingent upon the buyer obtaining the loan specified. Okay, so it's saying here, if we've got a loan contingency, so it's contingent, or it could be removed. But if it is contingent, the buyer shall act diligently and in good faith to obtain the designated loan, right? Remember, there's a representation being made in the offer about what type of financing the buyer is going to get. And one of the last paragraphs we ended on previously was that the seller is relying on the buyer's stated financing. And even if they try to switch loans and can't get a different loan they apply for, they still have to go back and try to get the original loan. And that could put them at risk, which we'll see here shortly. Now, it says here, and this comes up quite a bit as well. There's a lot of people have their opinions on this, and I hear all kinds of crazy talk out there, but here's what the reality is. If there's no appraisal contingency, or the appraisal contingency has been waived or removed, failure for the property to appraise at the purchase price does not entitle buyer to exercise cancellation rights pursuant to the loan contingency. I get this, I wouldn't say all the time, but frequently enough to where it is something that comes up, right? Well, if we don't get the appraisal, doesn't that mean we can cancel because of the loan? And the answer is absolutely not, right? It's two different contingencies. Otherwise, wouldn't they just lump them together, obviously, right? So, to put that to bed for once and for all, if you don't get the appraisal, you can't cancel and use the loan contingency if you've removed your appraisal contingency, okay? Two separate things. Another piece to this in terms of investigation and contingencies, and this is coming up more and more with how hard it is to insure anything really in California. Buyers advised to investigate the insurability of the property as early as possible, as this may be a requirement for lending. I just heard recently a lender said to the buyer, you need to get your insurance figured out within 3 days of opening escrow, which is probably a good practice, right? So when you have a buyer in escrow, get them on the phone with their insurance companies right away. I always tell them, just start with either a preferred vendor or whoever you're using for car insurance and see about bundling up or whatever and trying to get, discounts, but get it done right away to make sure you can insure the house. Okay. Because let's say you go buy a house and you don't realize that the seller had a whole bunch of insurance claims in the past 5 years, which is a required disclosure from them. Right. And it's so many insurance claims that the insurance companies all come back and say, we're not going to insure that property. Right. That's why it's a contingency here, for the buyer to be able to back out based on insurability. Okay. So make sure you start that process right away. There is a form in escrow instructions asking for the buyer's insurance. And that can be a trigger for you to remember to get them to, ask that question, right? All right. Another kind of important piece here. The contractual obligations of the buyer regarding deposit, down payment, and closing costs are not contingencies. What does that mean? Well, it means any of the cash needed to close is not a contingency of the agreement, right? When they write that offer, they're representing they have their good faith deposit. They're representing they have their down payment. They're representing they have their closing costs. So if they come back and say, oh, we couldn't get the money or we don't have enough cash, not a reason to cancel, okay? Let's see here. And kind of conversely or inversely from the appraisal paragraph, here it says, if there's no appraisal contingency, removal of loan, if there is an appraisal contingency, removal of the loan contingency is not deemed removal of the appraisal. So again, they're trying to make it very clear. These are two completely separate contingencies. They're not attached together, okay? Let's see here. No loan contingency. Again, obtaining any loan is specified as not a contingency of this agreement. If buyer does not obtain the loan specified, and as a result is unable to purchase the property, seller may be entitled to the buyer's deposit if they can get the loan. I'm sorry, this is more specific to the loan contingency, not appraisal. If there is no loan contingency and the buyer can't get the loan specified, the seller may be entitled to the deposit, right? Which makes sense. We know that. If you remove your loan contingency and you can't get the loan, sorry, right? Sorry, you're out of luck there. You shouldn't have been removing the contingency in the first place. And I know this is coming up frequently with the offers you guys are writing. Be smart about it. We always recommend to not remove contingencies unless you get your loan fully underwritten up front, right? That might be the only time to consider it. And some lenders are definitely out there doing that. And I think it's very important to do that in this market, actually. As always, guys, feel free to jump in with questions or comments either in the chat or you can unmute yourself. All right. Let's see.
Excuse me, I have a question, Nick.
Yep.
I'm fairly new. I'm really new to the contracts, and I just have a question. I know everything is separate, like you said, the loan contingency, and not to remove anything. But the appraisals say the property doesn't appraise and they don't want to give you the loan. So as long as you didn't remove the appraisal, the buyer can still cancel out within the first 2 weeks of putting an offer in, correct?
Whatever the time frame designated in the contract, which is 17 days, is the default. It could change based on the counter. But if the property doesn't appraise and there is an appraisal contingency, the buyer can back out, cancel the escrow, get their deposit back.
Okay.
So it's, the kind of the point I was making with this paragraph is just that it's very clear that the loan and the appraisal are two separate things completely, right?
Right.
So not being able to get the loan because the property doesn't appraise, that's not really a thing, right? It's you can still get the loan technically, right? The lender might say, yeah, we can still fund you, but we need the property to appraise at the correct price, right? But that doesn't mean that they can't get that they were not approved for the loan or that they wouldn't be approved for the loan if it had appraised. So again, just very clear that it's separate things. Okay.
And if your buyer really wants that property outside of or in escrow, or if they set something up outside of escrow, they can also pay funds that way. Is that correct?
They can pay the difference in cash. Yep.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All righty. So speaking about appraisal, kind of going still with the appraisal, right? There's another paragraph about it. The agreement is contingent unless otherwise agreed, right? We know that. It does go on to state here, without requiring repairs or improvements to the property, right? So it addresses, talking about like lender required repairs essentially for FHA and VA. So this agreement is, unless otherwise specified, contingent on a written appraisal of the property by an appraiser at no less than the amount specified, without requiring repairs or improvements to the property. So if there are lender required repairs, basically it's acknowledging the fact that the appraisal, even if it comes in at value, there may still be required repairs that need to be addressed prior to the close of escrow. Okay, so they bring that up here, which wasn't in the contract prior to. Another part of this is appraisal are often a reliable source to verify square footage of the property. However, the ability to cancel based on the measurements provided in an appraisal falls within the investigation of property contingency. So what does that mean? Well, they're basically saying that if you are looking at an appraisal and they measure the property and it says the square footage is lower than what it was in the MLS, can you cancel because that was told to you in the appraisal? No. You can cancel because you have a physical inspection or an investigation inspection contingency. If you were to remove your inspection investigation contingency, details in the appraisal regarding square footage would not be a reason to cancel. Okay. So again, rarely do we ever advise, I mean, I would never advise buying a property with no investigation contingency. So that should never become an issue for you. But that is something to kind of be aware of. There is information from the appraisal, but it's only, all the appraisals for is determined value, and that's it. Okay. Also, they added here, for any cancellation based upon the appraisal contingency, buyer will give a copy of their written appraisal to seller upon request, right? That's new. Okay. So this gives the permission for the seller to receive the appraisal from the buyer if we're canceling because of the appraisal. If they want to see proof, and if that's the case, then boom, there we go. Okay. Let's see. All right, and then lastly is our no appraisal contingency. Number, what are we on? 8B2. This is in there. It reiterates, buyer may not use the loan contingency to cancel if the only reason they're not obtaining the loan is because of the appraisal, right? So we reiterated that. What is that, like the third time? And it says here in clear terms, if buyer is unable to obtain the loan specified solely because the appraisal didn't come in, seller may be entitled to buyer's deposit or legal remedies, right? So they're really trying to, again, I mean, they've said it multiple times here, because they know it's been a rampant issue where agents are saying, oh, don't worry, we'll remove the appraisal contingency because we can use the loan to get out. Okay. We'll be able to do that. You couldn't before, but now they're just making real clear that that is not a thing. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Investigation of the property. This agreement is contingent on the investigation of the property, the acceptance of, the condition of, and any other matters affecting the property. So we know that. Review of seller's documents. The agreement is as specified contingent on the buyer's review of seller's documents required in paragraph 14A. Okay, we're going to get there. Now, more things that we are, that are contingencies and removal of contingencies. Title. This agreement is contingent on the buyer's ability to obtain the title policy provided for, and it's contingent on a buyer's review of a current prelim. Okay, so it is contingent on the buyer's review of the prelim and obtaining essentially the title policy that they applied for, which we'll talk about in a second as well. Now, it goes on to state here, buyer has 5 days after receipt to review a revised preliminary report. So usually we get the prelim within the first week or so. But what happens if we get an updated prelim a week before the close? If it has material or substantial deviations, we have a 5-day cancellation right on the buyer's side. Okay, so if essentially all we're saying is if new things come up that are substantially different, buyer has the right to cancel. Okay. And that's pretty much in tune with what the current contract says. Now, they just kind of put it in writing a little bit differently and more specific to title. This also applies to other material defects and disclosures that come up after contingencies are removed or after the sellers made their initial round of disclosures. Okay. All right. Condo planned development disclosures. It is contingent on the buyer's review of those documents. Another important one that comes up frequently: buyer review of leased or lien items contingency. Buyer's review of an ability and willingness to assume any lease, maintenance, or agreement or other ongoing financial obligation, or to accept the property subject to any lien disclosed, is a contingency of this agreement. So what are we talking about? We're talking about things like the HERO and the PACE programs and solar leasing and any work that was done where there's a recurring or ongoing payment. It's up to the buyer to approve that or not, right? They have the right to choose to not buy the property. So the seller is obligated to provide information to the buyer, and the buyer has the right to decide if they want to accept the lease, the lien, whatever it is. It does state also here that any assumption of the lease shall not require any financial obligation or contribution from the seller. So I get that a lot. Well, doesn't the seller have to pay off the lease? No, they're selling the house as is. If you want the lease, take over the lease. Now, again, it's contingent on the buyer deciding to assume it, but the seller isn't required to contribute in any way. Okay. All right. Let's see here. You have to bear with me since I'm kind of reading this along with you guys, since I'm still not an expert in this contract in any way, even having read it a few times. Okay. Removal or waiver of contingencies with the offer. Basically, it's addressing if a buyer is going to remove contingencies or on a contractual obligation, like maybe taking the property as is, the seller still has contractual obligations to perform, like delivering a TDS or a lead-based paint. Okay, so it's basically saying that the buyer doesn't have to remove any of those types of contingencies if the seller hasn't performed their duties, right? Which would be like delivering a TDS or disclosures. Okay. And then in bold here, a lot of bold, but more here. If the buyer removes or waives any contingencies without an adequate understanding of the property's condition or the buyer's ability to purchase, buyer is acting against the advice of the agent. Again, we're basically saying, don't remove your contingencies, right? It's just not a good idea. We're always going to tell you not to do it, even though we might tell you other people are doing it and it could affect whether you get the house or not. We don't recommend you do it. Okay. All right. So removal of contingencies or cancellation. For any contingencies, buyer within the specified time period will remove the contingency or cancel. Okay. Similar to what's going on in the current RPA. For the contingencies for review of seller documents, prelim, condo, planned unit development stuff, buyer shall, within the time specified, which the default is 17 days, or 5 days after receipt, whichever occurs later, remove the contingency. What does that mean? Basically, it means if we get like the HOA documents that are required by law to be delivered, after the contingency period has expired, the buyer still has 5 days to review and cancel the agreement. Okay. All right. What else we got here? Next couple are pretty much the same. 9, items included and excluded from the sale. There's been a reasonable amount of change to this paragraph, which we'll go through in a second here.
Nick, hi, it's Vibor.
Hi, Vibor.
Hey, can I ask you a quick question on the removal of contingency?
Yes.
I spoke with you on the phone about that too, but just to clarify, so in case the contingencies, basically the buyer does not remove the contingencies at all, right? So what happens in that case? They send a notice to perform, the seller?
Yeah,
and
basically,
the
yep.
and the buyer does not say respond to that, what happens to the deposit in that case?
So I'm going to give you a couple different answers. Okay. I'll tell you what the contract says, and then I'm going to tell you first and foremost, as agents and brokers, we cannot advise clients on what will happen to their deposit or what their cancellation rights are. So when you have a buyer or seller that need to cancel or have questions about what happens to their deposit, the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to tell you, is get on the phone with a lawyer at RARM or Car Legal and have them explain to you or explain to your client what potentially could happen. Because we can't guarantee and say, oh yeah, you can just cancel and get your money back, right? The contract says, right, that the buyer is entitled to their deposit in certain scenarios, yes. But again, you don't want to ever say, oh yes, you'll get your money back, right? Because that's like a guarantee, and we can't create that guarantee because the only person that can award a deposit is an arbitrator, mutual agreement, a judge, right? Those are the only people that can basically dictate what happens to money. Okay. Now, the way the contract is worded is this: it says the buyer has the right to conduct investigations or protect themselves with whatever contingencies, loan, appraisal, etc. And the time frames, right, which the defaults for all of them now are basically 17 days, right? Okay. If after 17 days, the contract says that the buyer still retains the right to cancel or make a request, even after the 17 days go by. And the seller can give a notice to perform, right? Up to 2 days before the expiration of the contingency, okay? Now, if the seller gives the buyer a notice to perform and the seller then gives cancellation, the intention of the contract, I believe, is that the buyer would retain their deposit, okay? Essentially, when the buyer's deposit really is at risk is when they've removed all their contingencies and they default on the agreement with no further introduction of a new disclosure, or the HOA docs come later or whatever, right? There's some exceptions there depending, but that's essentially how it's designed to work in the purchase agreement.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. You got it. Cool. All right, good. So what comes with a house? Well, note to buyer and seller. First of all, anything that's in the MLS or on flyers or marketing materials or disclosures are not included in the purchase price or excluded from the sale unless specified in this paragraph or paragraph 3P, right? Which is where you have the right to start checking boxes, what comes with the house. Okay. So essentially what this says is, just because something gets written into the MLS printout or a flyer, right, doesn't mean it comes with the house. So if you're working with a buyer and something is written in the MLS as included, you need to put it into the RPA. That's what matters the most. Okay. I shouldn't say the most, it's the only thing that matters, right? So that's huge, right? It happens all the time with flyers, appliances are noted on the MLS or whatever. I had a deal one time where some of you guys have heard me tell the story, but we wrote an offer. My partner wrote an offer for one of our buyers. I wasn't there at the showing. The agent verbally told my partner that, hey, the appliances are not included, right? Well, I didn't know that. I wrote the offer for our buyer. I wrote that all the appliances are included and they signed it, right? And here's the problem. The agent didn't review the contract and counter us that the appliances weren't included. My buyers would have definitely still bought the house. And at the close of escrow, we were doing the final walkthrough and we heard the seller say, oh yeah, we're almost done moving out. We just got to come pick up our washer and dryer. And they were like, oh no, they're included, and called the agent. And it's kind of funny. He texted me and blew me up. Was like, you're sneaky. And, Long Beach is a small town and blah, blah, blah. Like throwing all these threats out. I'm thinking in my head, like, dude, read your contract, man. I mean, it's clear as day to check boxes. I'm not trying to hide anything. So anyways, whatever representations are made outside the purchase agreement do not matter. It's what's in the contract. Okay. All right. Let's keep going here. Items included in the sale, all existing fixtures and fittings that are attached to the property. That's kind of the default. Now they did define things a little bit more, right? So we have electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing, heating fixtures, ceiling fans, fireplace inserts, gas logs, and grates, solar power systems. Okay, so they're included, but if they're on a lien or a lease, that was addressed in a previous paragraph, right? This is new. Built-in appliances and appliances for which special openings or encasements have been made. So this would include things like a dishwasher, a wine fridge, right? Maybe a microwave that was built in to a specific enclosure, right? So I would always err on the side of caution and specify exactly what you think is supposed to come with the house, okay? Because even like a special opening or encasement, I mean, does that include like the fridge opening? I'm not clear on that. Maybe this will be revised prior to December. We'll see. Write it in. There's a checkbox next to fridge, so I'm going to assume it's not included unless I check the box. This is new down here. Windows and door screens, awnings, shutters, window coverings. This was always a gray area. Like, is a window covering just the hardware, or is it the actual, drapes or whatever? Well, now it says it includes blinds, curtains, right, drapes, shutters, etc., or any other materials that cover any portion of the window. So that's been updated. All right, attached floor coverings, television antenna, satellite dishes, air coolers and conditioners, pool spa equipment, including but not limited to any cleaning equipment such as, right, the motorized automatic pool cleaners. Those are included. Pool nets, pool covers. So that's been expanded a little bit more. Garage door openers and remote controls, mailbox, in-ground landscaping, planted trees, pots, etc., plants and trees and so on. That's planted in the ground. That's included. Water features and fountains. Okay, so that was never specified. Well, now it is. Water softeners, water purifiers, light bulbs, including smart light bulbs, right? This contract does incorporate a significant amount of, smart devices and security systems and so on. Let's see here. All right. There is a note. If seller does not intend to include something that is not owned by the seller, maybe there is a fixture that's not theirs, it needs to be addressed and excluded on the purchase agreement. Okay. All right. Paragraph 3, security systems, including devices, hardware, software, or control units used to monitor, including motion detectors, door and window alarms, other equipment utilized such purpose, is included in the sale, right? So this is all under the items included in sale. So that security system, home automation, smart home features, any electronic devices and features, including but not limited to the thermostat controls, kitchen appliances, not otherwise excluded, lighting systems, right? Maybe you have smart plugs or you have a smart, fridge or something, right? And so some of this is going to conflict, right? Well, is a fridge included or not? Well, what if it's a smart fridge? Does that mean it's automatically included or not, right? Here's the answer. Specify in the contract whether you want it to be there or not, okay? Any non-dedicated devices, if checked, right? All smart home and security system controlled devices are included, except for any non-dedicated personal computer, tablet, or phone. So what does that mean? It means that if I run my smart home, like my Ring is connected to my phone, you don't get my phone, right? You don't get my laptop. Those are non-dedicated devices. All right, lease or liened items. So we addressed this a little bit in the contingency section that leased or liened items is subject to buyer's decision to take over the lease or the lien. But this paragraph says that the seller has to disclose it to the buyer, whether anything is on a lease or a lien or not owned by the seller or is subject to ongoing maintenance or other financial obligation, right? Like, water delivery or maintenance on a soft water machine or something like that, right? So the seller has to disclose and tell if anything is not leased or liened. And if they don't disclose, then they're representing that everything included in the price are owned by the seller and will be transferred free and clear of liens. Okay. All right. Items excluded. Much shorter paragraph, right? So they're really trying to just kind of declare what actually comes with the house. But here's what is excluded. Unless otherwise agreed, the following items are excluded. all items specified in paragraph 3P2, which I'll scroll up to in a minute, audio and video components such as flat screen TVs, speakers, and other items. So they've finally like spelled it out. Your TVs and your speakers are not included unless they are attached directly to the property without the use of a bracket. Okay, right? So if there's a bracket or mechanism attached, then it's not included. But sometimes you will see, you know, a home where a TV may be built into a wall fixture or something of that nature. Again, just put it in writing and specify. Don't take any chances, right? I would assume all TVs and audio equipment are not going to stay with the property. So if you want them, ask for them. Okay. Unless otherwise specified, brackets attached to walls, floors, or ceilings will be removed, and holes or other damage shall be repaired, but not painted. So if I take the flat screen off, the mount's probably coming with me as well, and I will patch the holes, and it's on you to paint. Okay. All right. Let's keep going. I will show you real quick, just since we're looking at what's included and excluded. 3P. Remember, paragraph 3 is that like the 4-page matrix of things that are kind of, you know, put into an easy format to understand. But we're looking at 3P 1 and 2, what comes with a house. Everything in the paragraph that we just reviewed says what comes with it. Anything additional, you can check these boxes here or write them in down here. And if something is excluded, you can write them in there as well. Okay. All right. And we already looked at that paragraph, so we'll keep on going here. Okay. Allocation of costs. Let's see. Yeah, we might get through a little bit more of this. So 10 is allocation of costs. It says here that if you ask for a report or an inspection or what have you, it only determines who's going to pay for the report, but it doesn't say who's going to pay for the work. You have to put that into one of the other paragraphs that we've already seen, or it needs to be on a repair request or an addendum or an amendment. Okay. It goes into required installations and property improvements, such as smoke alarm, carbon monoxide, securing of water heater. We all know these things need to be addressed, right? Water heater needs to be anchored, braced, or strapped to resist falling during an earthquake. We need to have smoke detectors in the bedrooms and the hallways, and we need to have a carbon monoxide detector on every floor, right? Basically, it says that this stuff will be done within the time specified in paragraph 3N4. I don't even remember what that is. Let's go take a look. 3N4, 7 days. I thought it was 5. So it's 7 days to do all that government required work. Sorry for all the scrolling here. All right, there we go. It goes on to state that, remember, it didn't specify who's going to pay for it. It's a negotiable item. It does state here that if the buyer is to pay for these items, buyer, as instructed by escrow, will either deposit funds into escrow or pay the vendor directly. Okay. And then seller will provide a statement of compliance prior to close, which would be on the TDS, or we have the water heater statement of compliance, smoke detector statement of compliance, CMD, carbon monoxide, etc. If the seller is supposed to pay for this stuff and then they don't do the work, the buyer can seek those funds from the seller. It says the seller shall be responsible for the buyer's costs. So if the seller says, yeah, I'll do it, doesn't do it, but we still need to do it before we close, and the buyer ends up paying for smoke detectors and getting somebody out to strap the water heater, the seller is supposed to be responsible for those costs. Okay. Similarly, point of sale requirements, what we normally call city reports, are addressed here. And I love that this paragraph is here, and there's some more information in the matrix up above paragraph 3. City reports and point of sale weren't really addressed all that efficiently in the old RPA. So now we're getting a little bit more clarity, and they actually changed the name of this paragraph to point of sale and not government mandatory inspections and retrofitting, right? It's a little bit easier to understand. Point of sale, there's a definition here of what that is. It does state that any of the work required will be done prior to the close of escrow, or prior to the final walkthrough. Okay. And then again, if the buyer is going to pay for any of these repairs, which they can certainly negotiate to pay for, they'll either pay the vendor directly, give an escrow, or give an invoice to escrow to pay, or bring the money into escrow in order to cover the bill. Okay. Let's see. Buyer will be provided a copy of the inspection report. Okay. And then another thing that's been added, reinspection fees. If any repair is not completed within the time specified, the lender requires an additional investigation to be made. Seller shall be responsible for corresponding reinspection fees. Okay, so now if the appraiser is going to charge to go back out, it's stated here that the seller is going to pay that fee. If the buyer ends up paying it, the seller would still be responsible and they could seek those funds from them. Okay. I would think they may revise the contract to add not only lender required repairs, but city required or point of sale required reinspection fees. We'll see. Okay. New purchase agreement is going to come out in December at the end of the year, and it'll be in use for a couple of months. And then probably in June, they'll revise it, which they typically release and revise forms a couple times a year. Okay. So we'll see how that goes. Information advice on requirements. Buyer and seller advise to seek information from a knowledgeable source regarding local and state mandates and whether they are point of sale requirements or requirements of ownership. What does this say? Well, it says that you as agents are not obligated to figure out if there are point of sale requirements. You know, we'll typically advise them to investigate themselves or check with an escrow company locally that's familiar with the city to see, are there anything that need any point of sale requirements for the area that you're working in, city, county, etc. Okay. It actually says here, agents do not have expertise in this area, right? We're not responsible to stay up to date on what every city requires when they sell a property. Okay. Home warranty, this is in there already, but buyer can choose any coverage they want. If they waive the home warranty, they still have the right to get a home warranty prior to close. So that's all there as it was before. All right, let me see here. Yeah, we'll do paragraph 11. I think we can get through this in about 10 minutes here. So statutory and other disclosures, including lead-based paint and cancellation rights. So, you know, the California Civil Code requires specific disclosures to be made and cannot be waived except in certain instances where the seller is exempt. This is basically the TDS, the natural hazards disclosure, which includes things like special taxes and assessments and Mello-Roos. It includes whether the seller has knowledge of industrial use or military ordnance locations. And it includes high fire and very high fire severity areas for defensible space and home hardening, which is newer. Okay. So those are statutorily required. And the only way that a buyer can essentially, let me say it this way. These come with a 5-day right of rescission, no matter when they're delivered, before or after contingencies are removed. You can remove all your contingencies as a buyer. And then if the seller gives the TDS, the day you are ready to record the deal, you've already funded and ready to close, the buyer can cancel and get their deposit back potentially. Okay. So those are the statutory disclosures. The only way those can be essentially quote unquote waived is if the buyer signs all of those documents, the TDS, the NHD, the lead-based paint, the FHDS, if it applies, before an offer is made, right? So way before, not even opening escrow, but before an actual offer is made. That's the only way to not have these statutory cancellation rights, okay? So if you're really working with a seller and the buyer says they're going to buy it as is, no contingencies, you better give them all those documents before they write that offer up. Otherwise, they still are protected. This section here, 11A2, is newer as well. It's very, very, very important. it says the TDS is considered fully completed, right? This means, when is the TDS fully executed and deliverable to a buyer? Well, it's when the seller has completed the very first section called coordination with other disclosure forms, okay, where there's a box, okay, in section 1, which usually the box we check is that no further investigations were used or no other inspections were used. And we'll look at the TDS when we do a class on the TDS, but they have to answer and check a box in section 1 on the TDS. They have to complete and answer all the questions. They have to sign the seller's information section. And the seller's agent, the listing agent, if any, has completed the seller's agent section for their visual inspection or delivered an avid with the TDS. I brought this up numerous times at team meetings. When you take a listing, ladies and gentlemen, and you give the TDS from the seller to the buyer, if you don't give your avid with it as a listing agent, the TDS is not considered complete. And then when you give your avid, whenever that happens, which I see avids going out after the close of escrow or on the date of close of escrow or within a few days of close of escrow, well, guess what? You just gave the buyer 5 days to cancel the deal, even if they've removed all their contingencies. You must deliver your avid with the TDS. And that should occur within the first 7 days after the acceptance of the contract. Okay. You'll hear me talk about this frequently. But yeah, that's that. What about the buyer's avid? The buyer's avid is not included in that cancellation right. So the buyer can give their avid on the last day before close of escrow. It does not trigger the statutory cancellation. Okay. All right. Paragraph, what are we on? 11A3 says that if we have a TDS, we're also going to have an SPQ.
I have a question.
Go for it.
On the TDS for the seller's disclosures, if they don't have it, if the listing agent doesn't give it by the 7th day, then after that 7th day, then can we do the what's that? Forgot what that form is called.
A notice to perform?
Notice to perform for those, right?
Yep, the buyer can give a seller a notice to perform, and really all that does is get you your right to cancel, which most buyers are not going to want to. But yes, you would use a notice to perform if the seller has not performed one of their duties. Absolutely.
Okay, and then when I get if we get the buyers to obviously review the seller's forms and then get back over to the listing agent, do I, as the buyer's agent, give my avid as well on the return with?
Yeah, I would do your avid as soon as practical. I usually do them at the physical inspection, which I typically do within a few days. And you can deliver it beforehand for sure. Or you can deliver it in return with the disclosure. It doesn't really matter. I would say as soon as practical, as soon as you have it available, the sooner the better.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep. All right. If any new material is discovered, seller is supposed to deliver a new TDS or SPQ, obviously, which could trigger more cancellation rights. Lead, same thing. It's statutory prior to 1978. We have to give a lead-based paint disclosure and give the buyer the right to investigate for any lead-based paint or other hazards. It talks about home hardening, right? If there is a TDS required, which is most transactions outside of like probate, et cetera, then the seller has to deliver the home hardening disclosure, which is the FHDS form. And they have to tell the buyer the features of the property that the seller is aware that may make the home vulnerable to wildfire and flying embers. That's home fire hardening, right? You're supposed to have a certain amount of space around your property cleared away. You're supposed to have like boxed eaves and non-flammable roof materials, that kind of stuff. Those are all the things on the FHDS form. In addition, if a TDS is required and the property is in a high or very high fire severity zone, the seller will also give the buyer a disclosure of whether the property is in compliance with any local defensible space laws. And the form FHDS basically says how to do that if required. Okay. As we noted, waiver of the statutory disclosures are prohibited by law. Okay. Buyer will return everything within 5 days. Just like I said, statutory and other disclosures trigger a cancellation right, which would be 3 days if you're receiving this in person, which is very rare, or 5 days after delivery by deposit in the mail or by an electronic record or email, right? So basically, if you receive your documents via email, you get the 5 days. Okay. And then also the buyer has a certain amount of time to agree or not agree to the defensible space requirement for the local area, depending on what that might look like. Most areas in a higher, very high fire severity zone are now requiring defensible space around property. And if the seller hasn't done it, the buyer may be responsible for it within a year's time. So they have the right to decide if that's if that's what they want to do or not, if they want to accept those terms. Withholding taxes, basically stating that seller escrow is going to withhold money depending on if they're required to for state or federal taxes, which I'll talk to you more about in a disclosure class. Megan's Law, we make note of the public sex offenders database here. Buyer is responsible to go investigate. Gas and hazardous liquid transmission pipelines. Underneath the property, there may be, gas, liquid propane, natural gas, whatever. Underneath the house, buyers advised to investigate. If they want to put a pool in or something like that, there's a website they can go to. Condos, planned unit development, seller is responsible to tell the buyer if there are any sort of governing body that has things like CC&Rs on the SPQ or ESD. And they're going to provide all the documents required by law for the HOA, which is all kind of described here in K2. Natural and environmental hazards, seller will provide the earthquake guide and environmental hazards booklet. Seller will disclose all known material facts and defects that could affect the desirability, including insurance claims within the past 5 years. Also, the buyer will provide buyer with permission to contact the lender to get information, right? Which is interesting. So the door is open now for listing agent sellers to be able to contact the buyer's lender, which is pretty cool. And you know what? That's it for 11. I think I'm going to stop right there. What do we get to? 8 of 16. So halfway done, right, of our 16-page purchase agreement. It's 3:58. We will wrap it up for today. Any last questions before I let you guys go today? Okay, not hearing much. So I'm going to let you all go. 2 more of these to go. We'll meet again in 2 weeks. I am recording, so we will have that available to you shortly. And I look forward to seeing you all soon. Hope you're having a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.